All right, ready for a deep dive. We're tackling Maersk today. And let me tell you, it's way more than just those blue containers you see everywhere.
It really is. People see the name, they think shipping, but the scope of this company is massive.
It's global, right? Like, they're everywhere.
100,000 employees, roughly 130 countries. We're talking ports, logistics. They even had their hands in oil and gas until recently.
Oh, right. They've been divesting, haven't they? Spinning off those divisions.
Maersk Drilling, Maersk Supply Service, gone. It's interesting, they're really focusing on that core transportation and logistics identity. Like, that's their legacy.
Makes sense. Double down on what you're good at.
Yeah.
And they've been good at it for a while. Family-run business, right?
Yeah.
Since the early 1900s.
1904, the Muller family. Talk about a legacy, multi-generational control like you don't see much anymore, though there was that change recently.
New leadership?
Yep.
Yeah.
New chairperson from within the family. Definitely marks a new era for Maersk. We'll have to see what direction they take things.
Speaking of direction, their logo, that star, everyone knows it. Is there a story there, or is it just, a star?
Oh, there's a story. Goes back to the founder, Captain Peter Muller, late 1800s. His wife, Anna, got very ill on a voyage. He was a religious man, prayed for her recovery.
And she pulled through.
She did. And afterward, he saw a 7-pointed star in the sky, took it as a sign of hope. Even put it on his first steamship, the SS Laura, back in '86.
From a sign of hope to a global brand. And honestly, you can't talk about Maersk without talking about the ships themselves. Some of these things are gigantic.
The Emma Maersk, for example, when that launched, it was the largest container ship in the world.
How many containers are we even talking about?
18,000?
Yeah.
At least. And they've got several of those, plus the Triple E class they're building now, even bigger.
Always got to go bigger, right?
Yeah.
But are they more efficient at least? Shipping isn't exactly known for being environmentally friendly.
That's the idea with the Triple E class. New hull design, more fuel-efficient engines. They are putting effort into reducing their impact.
Good.
Yeah.
Because when you've got a fleet that size, it's got to add up. Are they doing anything else on the sustainability front?
They are investing in alternative fuels like algae biofuel.
Oh.
They've even got test ships running on the stuff.
Algae biofuel, wow. That's pretty out there. Are they actually committing to any big reductions, though? Or is this all just, like, experimental for now?
Oh, they've made pledges. Their goal is carbon neutrality across the entire fleet by 2040.
That's ambitious. But even with the best intentions, things don't always go smoothly. Like that cyber attack a few years back. Not Petya, right? That hit them hard.
It did, and I don't think people realize how close it came to crippling them. That was the Russian GRU, by the way, malware attack that basically shut them down globally.
Their whole system.
Shipping routes, communication, everything. They basically had to rebuild their entire IT infrastructure from scratch.
From scratch. How long were they down for?
10 days.
10 days. I'm surprised the entire global supply chain didn't grind to a halt.
Right. It just shows you how reliant we are on technology these days. And on Maersk, apparently, not to mention the cost, over $300 million in damages.
Yikes. Talk about a wake-up call. Though, unfortunately, it doesn't sound like that was their only brush with controversy. There were those allegations about their labor practices, right?
Yeah, and these are serious concerns. Reports of worker exploitation in places like El Salvador and China, excessive hours, unfair wages, even attempts to stifle unionization.
And these were more than just rumors, right? There were actual organizations looking into these claims.
Absolutely. Groups like the Institute for Global Labor and Human Rights, Globalization Monitor, they've been pretty vocal about the need for more transparency and better worker protections from Maersk. It's a complex issue, working conditions in different parts of the world. And like you said, those are just allegations about their labor practices, not the only ones they've faced.
Right. There was that whole thing with overcharging the U.S. government, wasn't there?
Back in 2012, yeah. Shipping contracts, mostly related to military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Didn't they settle that for a considerable amount?
$31.9 million, though they never actually admitted to any wrongdoing.
Right. Settlements aren't admissions of guilt, just a way to make it go away.
Exactly. And it speaks to the complexities of these situations, often involving legal and contractual interpretations that are anything but straightforward. And then there was that incident in 2010.
What was that?
Maersk got fined for violating the U.S. embargo on Sudan.
Oh, right. I'd almost forgotten about that.
It's a reminder of how these companies, even massive global ones, have to navigate these geopolitical tightropes.
And then there's the human element, too, right? Like those lawsuits about sexual harassment and assault.
Yeah.
That's a whole other layer of complexity.
Yeah, several incidents starting in 2021. Maersk officers and crew members. One officer had his license suspended. There were allegations of rape. Even lawsuits filed by those U.S. Merchant Marine Academy students a couple of years ago.
It's easy to forget that behind these giant corporations, these global operations, it's still people. And where you have people, you have the potential for, well, for things to go wrong.
Exactly. It really underscores the need to address those systemic issues, regardless of a company's size or reach. But maybe we can shift gears a bit here. We've talked about Maersk's efforts toward a greener fleet, but what about their overall environmental impact, especially considering they're a Danish company and Denmark has some pretty ambitious climate goals?
Right. They're aiming to reduce emissions by 70% by 2030, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So how does Maersk fit into that?
Well, that's where things get interesting, because even with their sustainability initiatives, Maersk is a huge contributor to Denmark's carbon footprint. We're talking 80% of the CO2 emissions from their top 30 companies.
80% from just one company.
80%. And here's the kicker. Their emissions have actually gone up since 2019.
So they're working against their own country's goals.
It's not that simple. You see, Denmark's targets are based on what's called territorial emissions. Basically, they don't count emissions from international shipping and aviation.
So Maersk gets a free pass because their ships operate globally?
In a way, yes. They pay a slightly higher tax on their fuel, which is supposed to fund climate initiatives, but it's not a significant dent in their overall emissions. And then there's the issue of tonnage tax.
Tonnage tax? What's that?
It's a unique tax scheme in Denmark that benefits shipping companies like Maersk. They pay a fixed tax based on the size of their fleet, regardless of their profits.
So they could be making record profits, but their tax burden stays the same.
Pretty much. It's a point of contention because many argue that Maersk isn't contributing their fair share, especially given their environmental impact.
Yeah, that doesn't seem quite right. It does make you question their commitment to sustainability. Are they in it for the planet or just for the PR?
It's a fair question, and it's not just the tonnage tax. Maersk has also been actively lobbying against a global minimum tax for the shipping industry.
So while some are pushing for more corporate accountability, Maersk's pushing back.
They even managed to get an exemption from that big OECD tax agreement in 2021. It definitely muddies the waters when it comes to their image as a sustainable and ethical company. And then there's that incident just a few months ago.
Which one?
The Maersk Campton and the Candor, those two ships carrying that steel furnace dust.
Oh, right, from Albania to Thailand. That was weird.
816 metric tons of the stuff. And it's not exactly harmless, can be quite toxic, needs careful handling and disposal.
So what happened? Did they dump it?
That's what they're trying to find out. But here's the thing. As the Maersk Campton was approaching South Africa, they switched off their AIS beacon.
AIS.
Automatic Identification System. Basically a GPS tracker for ships. It's a legal requirement to have it on, but ships can turn it off in certain situations, like piracy zones.
Well, this wasn't a piracy zone, right?
And that's why it's raising eyebrows. When a ship goes dark like that, it often means they're up to something shady.
Like dumping toxic waste.
Could be. The containers were eventually unloaded in Singapore and then sent back to Albania, but that whole AIS thing definitely stinks.
Yeah, it does. So much for transparency, right? It's kind of pattern with Maersk, isn't it? One step forward, two steps back.
Yeah.
Hard to know what their priorities really are.
It's that tension, you know, between the image they're trying to project, all this talk of sustainability, and then these incidents that make you wonder.
Well, they are still a business, a huge business at that. Maybe you can't have both. Maybe you can't be a giant in global shipping A&D, be truly sustainable.
That's the question, isn't it? Not just for Maersk, but for the whole system. Can we keep moving goods around the planet at this pace and at the same time protect the environment?
I mean, we're all part of that system, aren't we? Consumers, too.
Absolutely. Everything we buy, everything that's shipped across an ocean, it's all interconnected.
So where does that leave us? What can we do when even a company as big as Maersk seems to struggle with this?
We make informed choices. That's the power of a deep dive like this, right? We learn about the company, the good and the bad, and then we decide how we want to engage with them.
Give me some examples. What can we actually do?
Support companies that align with your values. Look for transparency in their supply chains, their environmental practices. Don't be afraid to ask the tough
So
questions.
it's about being conscious consumers.
Exactly. And beyond that, there's collective action. Support organizations working to improve the industry, push for stricter regulations, let your elected officials know this matters to you.
So our choices do matter, even when it comes to a behemoth like Maersk.
They do. Maersk might be a titan of industry, but their story's still being written. And we, as consumers, as citizens, we have a say in how that story unfolds.
That's a powerful thought, and it applies to so much more than just shipping, doesn't it? It's about recognizing that our choices have an impact, and then using that knowledge to push for the future we want to see.
Exactly. So next time you see that Maersk container, don't just see a box. See a whole network of choices, of consequences, and then ask yourself, what role do you want to play in that system?
That's a great note to end on, a lot to think about. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It's been enlightening, if a little unsettling.
My pleasure. Always happy to go below the surface.